on to talk about another simple data type, which is going to be a string. I think string is going to be a very pleasant, nice topic to discuss because it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't require much of abstract thinking, and so with very little effort you'll feel like you make good progress. And so the first question is, how do you make a string? Of course, you use a text literal. So it's a set of characters you wrap in either single quotation marks, like in here, double, or backticks. Backticks are those funny commas that are on the same key as the tilde one, but it could be placed differently on your keyboard depending on the computer that you're using. So I've created three variables. All three will have a value of a string, and these are created differently. So the Lucifer Morningstar is with double quotation marks, Rachel Green single ones, and Mr. Bean with backticks. And please do not pay attention to the naming because this is not following good practices of good names for your variables. Let's say for the tutorial it's okay, because these are going to be simple examples. So what can we do with a string? Many things. The first one I want to show you is accessing a character. So this is notation that is going to be very useful in the future as well when we talk about the array, because this is me trying to get access an element at index 1 in that variable or of that variable. And so it's going to be very similar when we try to access or retrieve an element from an array later on. And so I'm working on the username, so I'm working on this value here, Lucifer Morningstar, and because we count from 0, it's just printed in the console, username, Lucifer Morningstar, and so the count starts at 0. So L would be at index 0 and U at index 1. So me putting here 1 is actually trying to get the second letter of that string. Just to be sure, I'm gonna print it out and got a letter U. So yes, if you put 1, it's you saying that you want to get an access to actually a second character. Even though it's a bit confusing, but that's how it works programmatically. Create an instance object of type string. So here we normally created our strings as simple data types. So we could declare a variable and then we assign it with a simple data type value. It could be either directly a string or like here making a copy of whatever is stored in my variable username, so Lucifer Morningstar, and then assigning the same variable, the same value to a new variable, meaning these are completely separate, and if I change the value of one, the other one wouldn't be affected by my action at all. So they live independently. Another way, less common, that you had seen, but it was just at the very beginning, so is with the use of a keyword new and a constructor. So this is an object string. It's signified by the capital letter S, and here is the value that I'm going to be using in order to create my string. And this is less common way of creating strings, and it's also not exactly the same thing. The value will be the same, but as you will see, the consequences of creating your strings this way slightly different. So if, for instance, I'm gonna show you the username, object username is storing an object type of string, And you can see the value is Lucifer Morningstar in quotation marks, meaning it's a string, but an object. And primitive username is storing a simple type, also the same string, Lucifer Morningstar. And the difference is that an object will always evaluate to a true value. So this will always return true, even if it's a completely empty string. So again, on the example, if I create a const named Kitty and assign an empty string to it, this way I can check its logical value. It's like as if I was saying, tell me whether it's true or false. The double exclamation mark is giving me the Boolean value of anything that I want to check. So as you can see, it's false because the kitty was an empty string. So it was nothing. It was just a string with no value. And in the empty string, one of the few values will be evaluated to false value always. And if I do the same thing, but so I put a cat and I'm using my keyword new string, and inside here also an empty string. So I'm creating an object type of string storing exactly the same value. So it's an empty string which should evaluate to false. But if I check its Boolean value, cat, it's gonna show me a value of true. And it's because any object will always return true. And so it might be not very useful to use this way in order to create new objects, because you will never know if, in order to validate the form, you will never know whether someone has put their name down or an empty string. So your data will never be you'll never be able to validate the data. So be careful with this one because it's got like separate properties as an object. Another thing, an empty string still a string. It doesn't matter if there is any character inside. The only difference being that if there is anything, even a white space, it's going to be a truthy value, and if it's empty, it's going to be a falsy value, so it will return false. Another way to create an object and type string is to use a keyword new as with the string, but different constructor. So using the general constructor of an object, also with the capital letter O, and inside the bracket you are informing the interpreter that you want to create a type of string. So you have to put the quotation marks. If you do the same thing with the constructor of a string, it's kind of done automatically for you, so you don't have to put the quotation marks inside here, signifying that it's going to be a string. And both ways will create an object type of string, empty string, storing a value of an empty string. Cool. String example, a new string, and inside here providing the value that I want to create. So it's a KitKat. If I wanted to just make a string out of a KitKat, it wouldn't do it for me. It would instead look for a variable declared and look for its value, and only the value that would be stored by my variable the program would like to put a string on or create a string out of. So this way is not going to work. If I'm going to say the program now, there is an error because KitKat is not defined. So since there is no variable, we have to make sure that we don't do anything like this. We always need to remember that if we want to create a string, we have to wrap it with strings, so double or a single quotation marks. the same rule does not apply to a number. So you can just pop a number inside the braces and it will do the job for you. So it will return a string. String example 2. And you can see that there is an object string type storing a value of a string 200.2. On to methods. So string has like loads and loads of different methods, and we will definitely not discuss like even not half of them. It's just a couple I've listed that I thought would be very nice to show how they work and what you can do with the string. But please remember that since there are so many of them, it's always good to kind of like Google and check if you need something and you think like, oh, maybe somebody has created that method already. And I'm sure there's a good chance you're gonna find it online. So there is no need to go through all of them. It's just when you need one, you look for one. So here I've got a username value. I'm accessing its toUpperCase method. So I'm turning my Lucifer Morningstar into all capital letters here, but the username itself, the original, remains exactly as it was, untouched. If I do username to lowercase this time, it's gonna turn those 2 capital letters into lowercase. But again, the original is as it was. We never changed the default value that was stored in the username. If we want to store the new value, we'll have to create a new variable and assign that thing to our new variable. So our username uppercase is storing now Lucifer Morningstar, all capital letters, having no influence on the original. So what we need to remember, methods, they do something. We call methods and we use the normal brackets to call a method. Sometimes we put a parameter, an argument inside there. But so methods do something while properties contain information. So we can retrieve, like for instance in here, we can access the length. So you have already seen this before. This is using the dot notation. So we work on this value here, on that variable, and by dot we are accessing whatever is inside available, and I want to check the length. And there's another way to do the same thing, exactly the same thing, and this is an array notation or parenthesized notation, which is slightly longer, but sometimes it is required to use this one instead of the other one. But I would say probably 98% of the time you will use the dot notation because it's just shorter, and when something is shorter, it's usually better. Cool. And how do we get a specific character? So you've seen this way of accessing an element, but we also have a method char_add, and again we are working on a certain variable, putting a dot, so we're accessing the built-in method, and char_add already exists. In the braces we put number of index that we are interested in. So if we want to get a character at index 2, we will put 2 inside. And okay, again, you need to remember we start counting from 0. So the character at position 2 will be C. Let's check. User name Lucifer got 0, 1, 2. Position 2 is represented by the character C. So this is something you've seen already today, But if we wrap that number 2, the number of index, in quotation marks, we'll also get the same result. So if we do this, we get C as well. Another thing we can do with strings is connecting them. And so far, we only worked with the addition operator, connecting strings, like in here. Let's make this shorter. And so the value of a username printed out as Lucifer Morningstar -cool name. And so that's our result. But there's also a method for concatenating strings, and it's as before, we are working on a variable, accessing its built-in method, so we're using concat in this case. And here in the braces, in the bracket, is what we want to concatenate. So we are adding our string. And if I'm gonna paste it in the console, it's gonna do exactly the same thing. There you go. And we also have our so-called superstring, and it's used using backticks. And so backticks allow us to kind of like directly inject JS into our website or our code. So for instance here, copy paste this. By the use of the $mark and curly braces, I can inject the value of a username directly into my string. And it's producing the same result. Lucifer Morningstar, cool name. Let's add an exclamation mark, why not? Save it. Cool. We've got another 3 methods. These are actually pretty useful when you validate a form. So for instance, you created a simple form online and now you want to check whether somebody has given their email, and you can't really check if that was the correct email, but you can with the simple validation in your code. You can validate whether this email contains character at. So for instance, username, which is a Lucifer Morningstar, it does not contain, and it's going to return index -1. So index of will return correct index at what index it found the character we are looking for, or if it doesn't find it at all because it doesn't include this character, it's going to return -1. There you go. If we put O, you're going to find it at index 9, and so on and so on. If you have more than one letter, it's going to find the first one and it's not going to look any further for another one. So for instance, username, this is for Morningstar, has N here and N here. So if we do index of N, it's going to return 11. If we do username last index of, and also look for an N, letter N, it's going to return 13 because that's the last index of this letter, the last N it found in that string. Also very nice for validation is method include. So it's only going to tell you whether the character is included or it's not, and nothing more. Since JS is a case sensitive language, so if you put capital letter O, it's not going to find it in our username. You would have to change it to small letter and then it's going to find it. So it's just to bear in mind again that it's case sensitive, so it matters whether you put a capital letter or a small letter. Trim is a very nice method because if someone is playing around and putting too many white spaces in their form, you can simply trim them. So all the white spaces from the beginning and from the end will be trimmed. Here I had a word, and it's nicely trimmed, so all the spaces from here and from here are trimmed. And if you would worry that a space from inside disappears, it doesn't. So if I do the same thing on the Lucifer morning star, you can see the white space from in between is left and nothing is changed here. So only from the beginning and from the end of a string. Repeat, so you might find it useful if you make a game or something. Repeat string. Here I've got a string word and I'm repeating it 5 times. So as you can see, it's clustered together 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I've got our string, and I'm working directly on that simple type data type value word and strings dot notation. So I can now use all the built-in methods, and here I'm working with repeat, calling the method, and inside as an argument I'm putting 5, so it means that I want to repeat it 5 times. So another method, slice, pretty useful. For instance, I work with commercials and we have to establish whether a certain domain has been included. I'm not going to go into detail, but let's say a Daily Mail, need to check if there is those letters are included, if this sequence is included in the domain, and so the slice will be very useful. So it takes as arguments or parameters, it will take as a first argument, it will take the first index that we want to start cutting at, and as a second parameter, it's gonna receive the index that where we want to finish cutting, but it's not gonna include that index. So let's see what happened with the cat word. Got just cat word. Cat word returns UC. That's how we cut it. I'm gonna try to copy paste this in here because I wanted to show you something else. Here you go. The console is gonna give you hints as what is gonna show or what is gonna be returned. So if we start at 0, because I want to start from the first letter, this is gonna show me where exactly I want to finish. And I want to finish at index 7 and include letter R. There you go. So that's how the slice works. And specific letter returned. So this we already had shown, but as you can see, it's not that only on a specific variable you can work. You can put directly method onto work on a value. So you can access any value and then access its method, and then it will return a character at index 2. And another interesting thing is what if you want to put, if you want to introduce yourself and you want to put in an informal way and you want to show a message like this. This, if I'm gonna uncomment, it's gonna be underlined, and it's gonna, if I save it, it's gonna throw an error because there is a syntax error, unexpected identifier. I'm gonna go back and leave it as it was. you cannot use an apostrophe if you are wrapping your string in single quote. You can use double quote, like in here, and then an apostrophe will be okay. Go, it's printing mpoppy, and there's no problem whatsoever. But if you are very attached to using only single quotation marks, then there is another way, and you have to use a backslash. So this is a backslash, and it's kind of like saying to the interpreter, like, ignore. And so if I copy this, will show exactly the same thing in the console. So it's ignoring the sign for us. And so we can put and use an apostrophe. Just remember to put backslash before an apostrophe. What happens if you actually want to print out a backslash? I'm going to comment this out and uncomment this slash. So slash will print out something without the backslash inside, because this sign has been ignored now. And what you have to do, if you need to a backslash in your string for any reason, then you go on and you do a double backslash, and one is being ignored but the other one stays. Cool. Convert another type to a string. So this is a method that you can use in order to turn a number to a string. And so there you go. We took that here. How many zeros have 1 million turned into 1 million as a string, if this is what we needed to do. Another method how you could like convert a number into a string is using it directly on a number. So for instance, we have a number 200, like in the example, and then if you put only one dot, it's going to throw an error because it's expecting a decimal place. So what you have to do, if I do this, then it's going to be an invalid unexpected token. What you need to do is use double dot. Oh, sorry, I'm missing an R here. Cool. Let's check if the other one didn't work because I made a typo. Okay, it's still the same error, and my typo had nothing to do with it because the decimal and the fraction was expected. So it's very confusing to the interpreter and it doesn't know what to do with this. So you have to make sure it knows by putting double dot. And what else you can do? For instance, 255 to string, and you can specify in bracket what you want to do with this. So for instance, you want to change it into a hexadecimal, FF, and so you put that as a parameter inside the bracket. And trick using implicit conversion. So we know that there are situations when the implicit conversion will happen, but sometimes if you need some quick solution, you may use this one and it will also work. So for instance, if you want to quickly change 200 into a string, you can just add an empty set of strings and it's gonna turn the value into a string. Same will happen here. Cool. So when there's an operation of adding, it's gonna turn into a string. But if it's gonna be any other arithmetic operation, it's gonna try to change it into a number. And well, at the beginning I showed you that if you want to access a logical value of something, so whether something is true or false, you can use double exclamation mark. But you could also use method Boolean. And so this is going to be the same. Cat. Our cat doesn't exist anymore. So let's say I want to access a value of a username. And it's going to return true. This is a longer way of saying this. Cool. So what's left out of simple data types is now Boolean. So this is the next topic, and I'll see you in a sec. Right, so we have the third simple data type to be discussed, and this is going to be Boolean. I have to say, Boolean is my favorite because it's only represented by two values. It can be either true or false, and it's so abstract and seems pretty simple and straightforward, but as with everything, it's got its quirks, and we'll talk about them in just a second. So we already know how to use a function, a number or a string, to change another data type into a string or a number. And for today we have a similar thing with the Boolean, meaning we have that function spelled with a capital letter B, Boolean, and inside the braces we put the value that we would want to change to a data type Boolean. So for instance, 0 is a falsy value, and if we paste that in our console, it would print out false. If we change that value to 1, 1 is a truthy value and it would evaluate to true, and the similar thing with any other number. But you gotta remember 0 and -0, both falsy values. Boolean and some expression inside is 2 greater or equal to 2. And we know that 2 is equal to 2, so it would evaluate to true. The whole expression would be true. Correct. But this one was a simple one. Everybody knew that. Then Boolean that has a string, converting the string. It would evaluate to true when it's not an empty string. So you gotta remember, and it's something to be memorized, that if it's an empty string, the value of that Boolean would be false. So empty string evaluates to falsy value. If, however, it looks empty, but I pressed space on the keyboard, it's no longer empty, and it becomes a truthy value. So only an empty string, and it doesn't matter. It could be single quotation marks or a backticks, and it would always come back as false. All right. A literal for an object creation, which is curly braces. Clear our console. And so if I put 2 curly braces inside here, you can see that I've created an empty object. And if I wanted to check the value of that, putting it in the console, I can see that it's gonna return true. So any object, even an empty object, would always evaluate to true. And the same thing goes for an array. This array is not empty, but even if it was empty, it would still return true. right? Trophy value. And as mentioned before, an empty string always returns false. So there are a few falsy values in JavaScript by default, and all the rest is not falsy, meaning they are trophy values. And so it's easier to memorize those falsy values because it comes up not only at interviews, but in the real programming world when you write your programs. And it's quite common to be using those. So you gotta kind of like, you just have to memorize those. So an empty string, regardless of how it is written down, double quotation marks, single quotation marks, or backticks. 0, also -0, falsy values. Not a number, falsy value. Null and undefined, all falsy values. Something to remember. Another thing worth mentioning here is logical operators. So for starters, something very easy. Is 2 greater than 4? It isn't, so obviously that's going to return false. 6 greater than or equal to 5? Is it true because 6 is greater than 5? And here, this is something we talked about already, but I think this is, by repetition, you're going to remember it forever. And this also comes up very often, both at interviews for a job and in your project. So you've got comparison operator of 2 equal marks. Is 2 equal to 2? It is equal. And even if it was in strings, as in the example, it would still return true, because there would be an implicit conversion happening underneath. So the interpreter would evaluate this as the same value, meaning true, regardless that the type is different, because the type wouldn't be checked, or you can say that the conversion is happening underneath. 1 in strings equal to true. This would convert to number and then compare. So 1 as a number and true would become a number. 1 because true evaluates to 1 and false evaluates to 0 in this computer world. And this would become altogether true. The same wouldn't be the case, and if we checked with the strict comparison operator, which checks for type and for the value. So the conversion is not happening here. It is not allowed because this is a strict comparison, and this is going to return false. True in this case becomes 1, but in this case cannot have the same thing, cannot happen, so the conversion is not happening. Cool. And 1 is a string and 1 as a number. Here, when checked with the strict comparison operator, also returning false because the conversion is not happening. It isn't allowed. Boolean negation. Convert to Boolean if it isn't yet a Boolean, and reverse. So the exclamation mark is a negation. So it would negate any value that is here. So here we have a Boolean used, so it's false, and it would change it. It would turn around the value to the opposite. having not false, meaning true. 0, we already said 0 is a falsy value, so it would first convert to Boolean, so false, but not false, meaning it's going to be true. And now it's true. This number is not 0 or minus 0, so it would be converted to true. And the opposite of true is false, so it would evaluate to false. And true would evaluate to false because of this exclamation mark here, which is a negation. Double negation works double as hard because it would first negate the value and then turn it around. But before all of this, it would also change any value that is given here. It would be reversed. It would be reversed to a Boolean value. So true, if we double negate true, it's still true. And if we double negate 0, 0 is falsy. So opposite of 0 or falsy value would be true. And then we're coming back, so it's false again. And empty strings, falsy, true, falsy. So again, similar with 0 as the situation with 0, it will become false. It's kind of like here is those examples are not like from a real life. These would come out very often at interviews, which is not like a real life scenario because this doesn't happen as often. But very often you would work on some variables and then you would need to use it in, for instance, in validation, or if you wanted to find out if the username has given its name. So for instance, one username has given it her name, Linda, and now for the program, for your program to work, you need to find out whether the user actually has given its name, his, her name, or they didn't. So this, with the help of double exclamation mark, you'll be able to turn any value into a Boolean kind of data type and validate whatever you needed to validate. So if we put this expression now and paste in the console, it evaluates to true because it turned Linda, so not an empty string, into a truthy value, so it's true, and that's what it's going to print out. So the program knows it can go on, the username has given it her name, and depending on the instructions given by you, the program knows what to do next. Another username was shy and decided not to give his name, and so the program will know that it has to execute whatever you instructed it to execute once the username doesn't want to give his or her name, which for instance can be obligatory, or there is a different set of instructions now. So that's that. And coming back to a logical and double ampersand, we gotta remember that both elements have to be true for the entire expression to be true. And here is a very nice example. So the user age is 22. You're 22, you have 10 pounds and 20 pence in your pocket, and you're coming into pub and you can see that the price of a beer is 11 pounds. So you know that you are legally entitled to buy beer, you can buy alcohol because you're over 18, but you don't have enough money. And so the condition is that the user age has to be greater than or equal to 18, the legal age to sell alcohol or to buy alcohol. And because both expressions have to be true, user money has to be greater than the beer price, because otherwise you cannot afford it. So both expressions have to evaluate to true for you to be able to buy this one beer. Let's copy that and paste it in the console. Let's clear the console first and then press enter. Unfortunately, the program evaluates your chances of getting that beer to false, meaning you don't have enough money. It's because it's our program. We can change the price of the beer just for you. And now it's turned into true because both expressions on both sides are true. Because for the logical end, both sides gotta be true for its entire thing to be true. But it's not always how you will see the booleans work or the logical end to work. So how does it work? If we have this expression 1 and end 0, if you paste it in the console, funny thing happens. It's printing out 0. And why is it printing 0? Because the program goes from left to right and it checks. It checks first value 1, evaluates to true, so it's good to go, and check the other side. Unfortunately, it's disappointed to see 0 on the other side because both values have to be true for the entire expression to be true, and it's stopping and it's printing out 0. So it's returning 0 because it found 0 on the second position on the right hand side. If, for instance, we had that expression, so an empty string and 1, so the first value is falsy. So the program doesn't see the point going any further. You can see that, oh, okay, this is already false, so there's no chance for this to be true. And it's going to print out the empty strings, meaning the falsy value right away. It doesn't go any further. If it was, let's say 2 and 2, so we know that both values, or maybe 3 to check to see that there is a different number. So both numbers are technically true. And the program goes from left, checks, okay, 2 is true. And the second value given is also true, and so it's going to print out the second value. So it does seem like totally abstract concept at the moment, but it's actually also pretty useful at work. And in our exercise soon to be. So if it's not that clear, I totally encourage you to kind of like copy paste things in your console and kind of get used to it. So both values have to be true. If one of them is not true, like the first one is not true, it won't go any further and it's going to print out the first value. If it's true, it's going to go on and check the second value. If it's true, it's going to print out the second true value. Or if it's not, like in here, it finds 0 on the second position, it's going to print out 0. Cool. And here, just as a repetition, got at least one operand has to be true for the entire expression to be true. So as you can see, there are more chances for the expression to be false than true, because false and false gives false, true and false. Even though one true occurs, it's still false. A similar situation here, and only if both values are true for the expression to return true. And a different story goes with logical OR, and also like a mini scenario for everyone to make like more vivid associations with the logical operators, is that we have two variables, user connections, and let's say there is a general accountant and she has a son, and so this is the connection of that user, and the second variable is the experience that a user has. Here, at least one value has to be true for the entire thing to evaluate to true. So if we check that with our Boolean function, it will return true, because even though the user experience is 0, the son of general accountant is a trophy value, so this evaluates to true, and so at least one side is true. If it becomes an empty string, it's no longer a son of a general accountant and has zero experience, then unfortunately the expression becomes false. But then again, he went on and he worked for 1 year, and so now he has experience. The expression will change again to true, because at least one condition is true, kind of. And there we go with this abstract concept of returning a value. Similar as with the logical AND, OR goes like from the left to right, but the program is satisfied finding only one true value. So if we put this in the console, it goes from the left to the right, finding the first trophy value, knows that the other one doesn't need to be true for the entire expression to be true, and it prints out 1. Cool. If, however, the first expression is falsy, so it's an empty string, it has to go on and check the other one. If the other one is also very disappointing falsy value, it's going to print out the second position, so the last element found. If it finds 1 on the second position on the right hand side, so meaning this is a trophy value, it would print out 1. If, however, it finds, or let's leave a string with something inside, it only goes and checks the first one, knowing that it's satisfied because this is an OR operator, and the second value is no longer needed to be true for the entire statement to be true, and it's going to print out something. So the first element. Cool. Very abstract, but very useful. So in this mini piece here, you can see that the chances are great that for the entire expression to be true, because only one element in this expression has to be true for the entire statement to be true. We've got 3 trues, only 1 false, and I was in the case with the AND operator. And just to summarize or revise what's already been talked about, this conversion from other types, so number. Now we have a Boolean, so we now that's true, returns 1. False would be 0. If you wanted to talk, number wanted to talk to Boolean and they needed to communicate in the same language, so the number would say, look mate, we gotta talk numbers, true, will always return 1, and false, if forced to change to a number, is gonna return 0. And string, which is more straightforward, is just gonna be wrapped in the string and it becomes true as a string, false as also as a string. It's just pasted to be sure, like make presentation more valid. I put string and in the brackets false, it's gonna return false as a string. Beautiful. This is beautiful, beautiful language to work on or to work with. I hope you enjoyed those mini examples. And I invite you to a little more complex material.